second. Oh, I am a go. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for a conversation around decolonizing new play development. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that I am coming to you from the traditional lands of the Ohlone people. And I want to acknowledge the Ohlone community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. And as we begin this conversation about decolonizing our practices, I also want to acknowledge my own settler privileges that come with the erasure of and exclusion of many Indigenous people. And I encourage you, if you have not done so already, to research and also acknowledge the original caretakers of the land in which you are on. I am Jessica Bird-Beza, the Executive Artistic Director of Playwrights Foundation, a new play development organization on the colonized lands of San Francisco, California. And this conversation today is within the context of our Theater Professionals Weekend of the Bay Area Playwrights Festival. And I want to recognize that we at Playwrights Foundation are a predominantly white institution who supports and develops work of BIPOC writers and other marginalized communities. And we have a responsibility to examine our practices and structures as we strive to create a more equitable and inclusive world. And so this conversation is a part of that journey. And when we were looking at the panel conversations throughout the festival, it felt really important to start to grapple collectively with this idea of decolonizing the new play development process itself. So I reached out to NNPN to partner on presenting a conversation on a larger scale within the new play development world, so that we can start to learn to unlearn as we strive to move forward. I also reached out to Claudia Alec with Calling Up Justice, who has helped to guide the conversation and has also challenged the process itself along the way in good ways. And I'm excited to continue to listen, to learn, and to partner on how to dismantle our colonized structures within ourselves and also our own organizations. So I invite you to also be thinking about how you can continue to decolonize your own thoughts and processes and your own organization as well. So I'm going to invite our guests to join me. And I want to introduce Mina Morita, our moderator for this conversation, and who's going to guide us into the next part of our process. And I am going to leave it to this fabulous group for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, for inviting us to this space this morning. It is wonderful to be here. I'm very excited today for our roundtable discussion where our conversation will be between us on the panel as much as it will be for you. I myself am a student of this work and am excited to learn and listen. My name is Mina Morita. I use she, her pronouns, and I identify as a mixed Asian American woman. I'm calling in from the unceded Ohlone land, currently Oakland, and I'm the artistic director for Crowded Fire Theater, a vital home for fierce new plays. I am thrilled to be here with our marvelous colleagues, and I'm grateful for this panel's wisdom, being sure to credit all of this conversation in relationship to any knowledge that you glean today, as opposed to extraction of knowledge. So let us go in with this mindset. To get us grounded and open to this learning conversation, I would like to take us through a grounding breath in order to open up our bodies. For some of us, it's morning, some of us, it's afternoon, and get our minds and bodies ready for this moment. So if you're sitting or standing, if you could just center yourself, put your feet on the ground, on the earth. Take a deep breath in and close your eyes for a moment. Think of a memory back to sitting in nature, wherever that is for you. May it be under the sky, listening to the breeze, to the birds, to the insects. listening to waves, considering our connection to the ground, to the earth from which we come. And when you're ready, open your eyes, breathe out, and arrive in this moment, ready to learn and listen. Thank you all. And I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves with their names, preferred pronouns if desired, and identify how your work lives in the theater. We will go in order, making sure that our Indigenous and Black panelists go first. So I invite, starting with Madeline.
Kwai Natiwis Achokais, Natiwis Muhiksak, Kyokochi Sochimankis. Hello everyone, I'm Madeline. I am Mohegan. I'm calling in from Mohegan lands right now, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I, within the field, am both a freelance director as well as the executive director of the Yale Indigenous Performing Arts Program. And I'll turn it over to Tara.
Mado. He's Jay, Tara Joho Chief Kados. So hello everyone, my name is Tara Moses. I am a citizen of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma, and I am also Muskogee Creek. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am calling in from the Muskogee Creek Reservation that is colonially known as Tulsa, Oklahoma. And for my practice, I am a director, a playwright, a dramaturg, and the artistic director of Tela Tulsa, which is Northeastern Oklahoma's first and only theater specifically dedicated to Native and Latino artists and their stories. Yeah, with that, turn it over to Claudia.
Hello. I'd like to take this moment to begin by acknowledging that settler colonizers and imperialists from Europe took and unceded the land on which we gather from the indigenous people who stewarded it for generations. I also like to acknowledge that settler colonizers and slavers from Europe used stolen and enforced labor of African people to subsequently develop that land. I acknowledge that we currently have concentration camps right now and people who are incarcerated. So just thank you for this moment to acknowledge all those who endure and continue to endure in the face of settler colonialism and white supremacy. I'm Claudia Alec. My gender pronouns are they, their, she, hers. You can use those interchangeably. I am a cultural producer, an advocate. I'm the executive producer of Calling Up Justice, a transmedia social justice company. I'm an educator and co-president of the network of ensemble theaters. And I have a physical disability, so I like to do an access check-in just to let folks know I've been in the middle of like a 3-day pain flare. So if you see me, pull a face, or if my voice sounds like I'm deeply angry at you for no reason, it's because my body is doing things. Other than that, all of my access needs are met. And it's a pleasure to be here. I'm unsure who to pass the microphone to, so I'm going to allow someone else just to take agency and speak for themselves.
Thanks, Claudia. Hi, everybody. My name's Annalisa Diaz. I use she, her pronouns. I'm calling from Piscataway lands, colonially known as Baltimore, Maryland, by the waters of the Chesapeake Bay. I'm the Director of Artistic Partnerships and Innovation at Baltimore Center Stage, and also co-founder of Groundwater Arts with Tara. And I'm also a playwright and director and performer as well. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Nan.
Hey everyone, I'm Nan. I'm speaking to you today from the unceded territories of the Seminole and Tequesta people in West Palm Beach, Florida. I use the she series for pronouns, and I'm part of the team at National New Play Network, which is an alliance of about 125 theaters all across the country that work together in innovative ways to develop, produce, and extend the life of new plays. I'm a lifelong advocate of new plays and the theaters and theater makers who create them, and I'm delighted to be here today. I am white, I am older, and I am here to listen and learn, and in some cases, I think, be representative of a lot of the folks that are watching today. So I'm delighted to be in this wonderful company and be with you today.
Thank you all so much. So I'm going to invite all of us to kind of relax our bodies and get ready to have a really, really wonderful conversation this morning. You know, we've all been on the Zoom, so just saying that out loud. And let's start with this centering the conversation around decolonization. So what is decolonization? Madeline, would you start us off in this conversation?
Sure. So a lot of times in these conversations, one of the first things that comes up is this attempt at defining decolonization as a phrase. But I think that the practice of starting with defining is actually very problematic because it is a colonial construct. The English language is very good at breaking things into boxes and borders and delineating this from that. And because it is decolonization, the very nature of the thing, right, is in relationship to colonization. We are trying to dismantle those systems. So I personally, for me, decolonization does have a very specific definition, because for me, decolonization is indigenization. For me, on my own homelands, at Mohegan, what I am doing when I talk about that is I am embracing rhetorical sovereignty, making sure that, you know, our language is actually speaking to things, actively dismantling the oppression that has been imposed on my body, my mind, my spirit, all of those things. But that framework is not the same for every single language, for every single place, for every single process. So a decolonizing process is not one that can just be, you know, imposed across the spectrum, right, on new play development processes, because then you're just recolonizing new play development processes in another way. But that, you know, for me, it's constantly about, as a Mohegan person, how do I, instead of using the principles and the pathways and the mentalities of the people who, you know, made my culture, my language, my art practices illegal and forcibly replace them with their own, how do I, instead of using those practices, return to the good medicine that I was raised with, that I have to constantly seek out because of the ways that it was buried further and further into the earth around us by these oppressive practices? How do I seek out the other ways of being that have been here all along that actually come from the land that we're on? And so a lot of times when I think about the sort of how do we define decolonization, even though I know that for different people it is a very concrete definition, I also want to create space to understand that what we're doing here together as a collective with different experiences is never about creating a universal, because the whole issue of colonization is the fact that these universal ideas and these universal concepts have been imposed on us. And the fact that we have to have the word decolonization instead of like a brilliant, beautiful multiplicity of words for the things that we're doing is a part of that framework.
Thank you. And in light of that, we're a collective of people right here. Can we hear from each of you in terms of how you would say or define what decolonization is for you?
Yeah. Well, Maddie said it. What I will add is, so I say a lot that there is no, quote, what decolonization means to me. And where that comes from is for folks who have not been colonized. So these are specifically European Americans, Europeans, folks from that area, tend to make decolonization become this like metaphorical, visceral, like, how do I feel about this? You know, we're all artists, we love our feelings anyway. But that's not this, right? You know, feelings have their times and their place, interpretations, creating, but this decolonization is not that. And so, you know, as Maddie spoke about, like, it is very personal, very real for people who have been colonized and continue to be. And that manifests in every which way, pending the individual, your backgrounds, your family's backgrounds, histories, et cetera, et cetera. And so for me in my practice, whenever I walk into a rehearsal room as a director, Annalisa's gonna laugh. Anyway, but I very much embrace this notion that time is a relative. And so, which is, I don't know, I say it all the time, a broken record, y'all tuning in who know me. Anyway, but with that, it's theater is a colonized art form as we currently know it, as it is currently, quote, defined. How funny, defined. Anyway, because it is very much created within the same Western Eurocentric way of telling stories. And I think it's super important to realize that storytelling has been happening as long as the sun's been in the sky by capital I Indigenous people from across the world. So how come we all focus on just one little area, like, and that's colonization for you. And so whenever I walk into a rehearsal room, whenever we think of, oh, we have very strict time, whenever you walk in there and you're giving a rehearsal schedule, we're working on Act 1, Scene 4 for approximately 45 minutes, and then we're going to do this, and then we have a break. Now, I'm not anti-break, equity, yes, we will take our breaks on time, but anyway, and so, but what happens if we work relationally to one another? What happens whenever we view and treat every individual in the room as a storyteller? Because that's how my people tell stories. And you know, it's like stage managers aren't just there to keep us on time and tape out the set, they are also collaborators in the story that we're telling. And so as a director, that's how I come into this space. As a playwright, you know, the words I write, I say all the time, are not sacred. And so, which is like taboo, so I hear. So like if there are like phrases as an actor that you're having a hard time hearing or like saying, let me know, let's change it. You have a better idea, let me know, let's change it. You know, does our intern in the corner have thoughts about the development process and like the arc of the play, the structure? Let us know, because together as an ensemble, as a community, is how we tell stories. And so those are just two ways as a playwright / director that I utilize that. Yeah. Claudia, I would love to know your thoughts.
Oh, I have so many. I have so many. I love listening to your thoughts because they spark my thoughts. I made a list. So first, just thank you, Madeline, for starting us off deconstructing the colonialist notion of a magic word that's going to have a magic definition that's shared by every single person. And if we don't use it in that exact way, we deserve to be policed and punished. And we shouldn't get our justice because we're not using the words right. Thank you for acknowledging that language is a tool. It's necessary, I think, at the beginning of these conversations to really explicitly have a shared agreement on how we are using this language together for meaning making. Because I also recognize that folks, they come up with definitions for words in their head, and then they will listen to a full conversation from me and walk away with a lot of different understandings because they were filling in something different when I said the word decolonization. So I do say decolonization is not a magic prophylactic that's going to help you to avoid the outcomes and impacts of white supremacy culture inside your organization. Decolonization is not a quick fix, easy checklist. Like listening to this conversation, you are not going to leave with your handy dandy packet of this is how I can very easily decolonize my practice. That's not how it works. And if that's what you're searching for, you're actually engaging in a colonized process. I also am just deeply grateful that we are having this conversation and not a siloed Indigenous frame, because I think that's a piece of white supremacy culture too. Doesn't that make it a lot harder to decolonize if it's only about one community's negative impacts from colonization? I've been doing my best to try and lift up the African American experience in decolonization, because I need my brothers and sisters to be in this with me. I will also say that whenever someone asks me, why is this word, what does this word mean to you? I always have an allergic reaction to that because it's often framed in like newspapers would often ask me, so why is the Martin Luther King Day celebration special to you? And I want to break that apart because it's not special or important to me specifically. It's important for all of us. This conversation we're having is about saving this thing we call cultural producing. So I begin this conversation recognizing that we are embedded and involved in the unhealthiest of systems that have been killing us generationally. And only now, at the sort of end part of this process, are folks realizing we have to stop doing it this way. I'm excited about finding a different way to do it. All right, those are a couple of my ideas. I want to hear Annalisa's ideas.
I have to find the unmute button first. Yeah, thank you all so much for getting it started this way. One of the things that we were talking about in one of the prep calls that we had, I just want to bring some of that thread back and build on what Maddie sort of started us off with, thinking about this idea of universalism and how like colonization happened across the globe, and each context that it sort of happened inside of was very, very different. So like Maddie was saying, colonization looks different no matter where you are. So so therefore, there cannot be any one single definition or any one checklist, as Claudia was just saying, that's going to be the solution for how to decolonize everywhere. And so like, for me, living in Baltimore, on Piscataway lands, like there's a very specific context of colonization here. And for me, as a person whose ancestors were colonized in Goa, which is a part of what is now called India, like I'm sort of, and like also I have I'm a descendant of white settlers too. So like understanding for myself what is going on inside of my own body. I learned so much from Tara talking about, she hasn't talked about it yet, but maybe she will, but sort of like the intergenerational trauma that we all carry inside of our bodies, and how colonization sort of manifests presently. Like it's not over, right? It's still ongoing. And everything that has happened to our ancestors is still like playing out presently right now. and like, what responsibility then do we have to the future if like all of this is sort of like flowing through us? I got on a little bit of a tangent, but my point was colonization needs to be hyper local and hyper specific. There cannot be one universal definition for it. And therefore there's no like one universal way to decolonize. It has to look different no matter where you are.
Thank you all for that. And I know that part of this conversation is how we even planned for this panel discussion. Would somebody be willing to just talk about how we were decolonizing this process?
I think for me, you're talking about hyper local. It's hyper individual for me. I mean, this whole idea of beginning to question every single thing that I do and every single system that I participate in. So this conversation in the original preparation was just eye-opening. And the idea that Claudia said, even the idea that we're doing a panel in this way, and that a panel sits in a place of hierarchy, that we've been designated for whatever reason, that all is a part of that colonization. And just recognizing the depth and systemic totality of how we live our lives through this lens has been huge for me. And I'm so grateful to have been in the conversation that began the conversation. So I think, as Jess mentioned, she really wanted to tackle this, and NPN was really wanting to partner, because we're trying to do this work as an organization and to help our theaters do the work. But most importantly, what I'm learning is it's about how we each as an individual embrace the work. So this is very exciting to talk to you guys individually, but also to watch the language and the learning be able to be taken both privately and publicly into ways that will make a difference. Dogs.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add anything?
Well, I'm wondering if this is an invitation for me to surface calling up Justice's engagement with this particular project. So every single time I'm invited to be on a panel, there's a second layer of labor where it isn't just I get to show up and just like say things. There's a preparatory session where we plan what we're going to say and frame how we're going to say it. And to me, that's design labor. That's and that design labor actually levels me up as a co-producer of the panel. Also, the idea of the honorarium. We live in this capitalist construct, which is problematic and toxic already. It's putting us in a context of problematic exchanges, yes? And then we are offered an honorarium, which is meant to honor our participation. And yet, if that price point is really low, it can actually serve to devalue the work of culturally specific cultural producers. How many times have we as people of color been invited, or BIPOC community been invited to perform, enhance, help to shore up the weaknesses of predominantly white institution failure through our knowledge? And we've been offered an honorarium. So I wanted to say yes to this invitation because I like Bay Area Playwrights Festival. I like y'all, and I want this conversation to take place, but I could only say yes to it if I could be invited as a co-producer, not just as a participant. Once we got in the room, though, I realized I'd failed to make sure I'd done that with the rest of my colleagues, because I would argue that you co-designed this session with us as well. And I credit the knowledge creation and work that Groundwater Arts has been doing, that Madeline, that you've been doing at Yale. I just go, there's a lot of knowledge making that helped to create this session. I'm curious about what the point of panels is. So I'm also excited to have this conversation and not repeat this exercise in 2 years.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's very powerful to look at the process we're in the middle of, even as we're having this conversation. So let's keep deconstructing and like dissecting and opening things up. So how does colonization live in our new play development work?
Ooh, do I got some thoughts?
Yes, please.
All right, so buckle up, friends. Well, first of all, what is a play, right? Think for yourself right now, those at home, fun exercise time. What do you think is a play? Is there an inciting incident that happens right at the beginning? Do we then build to a specific climax that happens at intermission, and then maybe another little one towards the end of the play? I don't know. Is there some falling action? Like, is the themes of said play very obvious and very clear? Does it happen in a pretty little picture box? Is it written? Like, when you think of name me 5 notable plays, are the playwrights you mentioned all old white men, probably dead? Think about who are, like, name 10 really notable people that you admire who are playmakers, right? Do they create their works within that same Eurocentric way of telling stories? All right, cool. So the answer to all of those is, yeah, that's what it is, unfortunately, across the board. And so whenever we think about new play development, that is the frame of mind that people are coming into the room with. And by people, I don't just mean white people, because all of us have been taught from that Eurocentric way of creating theater. And so for me, myself, in my theater education from university and beyond and everywhere, it has all been centered and framed within the Eurocentric way of creating theater. And so that's what new play development is as it currently stands. And so thinking about, like, well, how do we not do that? Well, we do that by not centering the Eurocentric way of creating stories, AKA the theater that we know it. And what you'll find is that then a play looks radically different. How we go through that process looks radically different. There isn't this hierarchical, we have the playwright's words, and then we have a director, then we have the dramaturg who's there to be a liaison, and then also think of things from an audience perspective. And that audience perspective is coming in with that Eurocentric standard of what they're going to see on stage. All of that gets thrown out the window. And so when I think about decolonized new play development, it's kind of funny because I almost don't want to call it new play development, because for me, that phrase new play development has been tainted and defined by Eurocentric colonization.
New play colonization. Yeah, very good, Tara. But yeah, basically that's what it is. Because how often do you, I mean, like just speaking of my own experience with native play, how often do you go into a new play development process where, you know, you're bringing it in to a predominantly white institution with a predominantly white audience, and the expectations when you show up is you're going to adjust that play to make those people care about it, not to actually serve necessarily the communities that the play is written for or the play is written about, but to sort of lend, you know, to sort of perpetuate the mentality that those people already have and their expectations they already have. And for us as Native people, usually what they've seen up until this point is red face. So their expectations for what we are and who we are genocidal propaganda. And if we're you know, if we're moving into that, we're in a whole trouble territory. Something I've been thinking about during this conversation so far is that colonization did not happen by accident, right? Like colonization was very intentional. Like they, you know, every single aspect of it, from the more direct genocidal aspects to, you know, making art practicing illegal, like actually fully illegal, you know, fully like speaking our languages fully illegal, like the actual, not just not funding our art, but it's surprising to me how often people don't realize that our art was actually made illegal. And so when they have this sort of mentality of this, like, oh, like, you know, these stories are so new to us. We didn't know there was native plays, or we didn't know that there, you know, it's like, well, if we were doing it, we had to be doing it in secret because you made it illegal, while at the same time you were making it required to be teaching Shakespeare to all of the public. So there was a very intentional systemic action happening in terms of how storytelling is being manifested to the public, what the rules of storytelling have to be. But something I was thinking about, I have to slow down, I keep forgetting. Something I was thinking about, really, really silly thought was, my mother was aggravated. She says, "Ugh, another decolonization panel. That means you're still talking about colonization and not actually moving on still." And when Annalisa said, sorry, I have to find the unmute button first, I started laughing because I was thinking like decolonization is just that moment of being like, wait, we need to find the unmute button first, because we can't actually have a liberated conversation until we find the unmute button and acknowledge that there are all these other ways of being. And so just really quickly, just that, and then tying that into, Nan at one moment said the experience was hyper individual, which I think in that context made sense, but the sentence sort of flagged something for me, which is that I think the only mistake someone can make in the decolonization process is worrying too much about themselves. Ultimately, the goal of a decolonized process, right, is to connect deeper and to question more. So connect deeper with those around you, with the place you're in, with all of the aspects of the environment that are interconnected, right, which is why the whole defining thing becomes very problematic, because things aren't separated, they're interconnected. But then that also, if you're constantly asking questions to the people around you, if you're constantly engaging in collective action, if you're thinking about the world not as a leadership hierarchy, but as a place where leadership means building consensus amongst a group, that you have to interrogate the thing and interrogate the thing and interrogate the thing together to the place where you come together, not the place where you squash someone down. That really, really thinking about how we operate in relationship is such a core part of this, and that the individual is certainly an aspect of how we engage in relationship, and how we come to that engagement. But that at the end of the day, if you ask a question, you'll always be better off than if you try and find the right answer on your own.
I just want to do a shout out to the mythology of perfectionism. that white supremacy culture created this thing that was like, oh, this is what perfect behavior is. Nobody actually does it, but it's a great thing to pretend exists so that you can deny people access. Say, you're not behaving perfectly. You're not doing it perfectly. You shouldn't even try because you're not doing it perfectly. It's a great way to excuse your own inaction. It's a wonderful way also, well, I'll stop talking. I'm repeating what you were just saying. So yes, the mythology of perfectionism. I also just want to do a shout out to what Tara was just talking about, because the definition of what is good, of what is success, is within the capitalist construct of our colonized country, right? So that means if I'm making a piece of cultural production, I have to decide, do I want it to succeed commercially? Do I want it to and what's required to succeed commercially in a white supremacist culture? And how do I know what's good? I've been told a lot of things that I know are good are not good. Why? Because it actually serves white supremacy culture to devalue our aesthetics, to devalue our healthy ways of creating work. I would love to have clarity about what's good, y'all. I really would.
I just want to, I'm going to be quiet after this because I just talked too much, but I really want to, just to build on what Claudia said, also really address this question of what our expectations are of the audience. Because like, you know, traditionally in storytelling, the audience is bringing half of the narrative themselves, right? But what that means then is how you're thinking about audience, what you're expecting from your audience, how you're expecting, like, you know, to do engagement in terms of bringing in new audiences is all much more complicated, because if you're telling a story that is a white supremacist structure and then you're saying you're doing engagement, but those people are bringing their history and their knowledge and their half of the story to the thing, you're very often traumatizing that group of people that you've then brought into the theater. So just really thinking about, you know, if the audience is an equal collaborator, because they are, what is that relationship actually when you're thinking about what stories you're telling and who you want to have in your audience?
Do we want to talk about audience too, and how we shape stories for the audience, or how we think about decolonizing that process?
Yeah, real quick. So what's interesting is that how we think of audiences is colonized, in that we treat them as they are coming to see what we did, experience what we tell them to, and then they're going to walk away. And so, I mean, again, it's so funny. I joke, it all roots back to Europe. Anyway, but because of like how European theater was created, is that it was a very separate process from the audience. And so whenever people came in, they're seeing something that they have deemed was done and complete. You experience it, then you leave. And so now bringing it back to me personally, Tara, whenever we tell stories here in our community, the audience is a part of that. They're invited into it. They put their inputs in it. They change it, et cetera, et cetera. And so whenever I think about how do we decolonize our audiences, number one, it's we treat them as they are, which are living, breathing human beings coming into our space together, number one. And then number two, how do we invite them into our space? You know, I'm not advocating for everything is immersive theater, but it's how do we make the audience feel as though they are invited and welcomed, right? I mean, it can be explicit. Like right now, Maddie and Lisa and I are workshopping over the past few days, in the next days to come, a new play of mine called Arbika. And a character at the very beginning invites audiences in and lets them know that they can't come to this place traditionally unless they are invited. And they're being invited. So welcome, because it's a very real place. Arbika is a very real place in Oklahoma that's not open to non-native members of that place. And so it's from the get-go, right? That's very explicit. That's not the only way. How else can we do that? And I'll leave one polarizing hot take, and I'd love to hear from someone else. But whenever we take a play, like something by Tennessee Williams as an example, he's my go-to. We take Glass Menagerie. Oh no, Maddie. Even if we cast that play with Black and brown bodies, and they are performing that play, they are still saying the words written by a white man very much within white culture. Glass Menagerie is very specifically about white Southern low-income culture. That is a unique experience that also low-income Southern Black and brown and indigenous people do not have that same experience because they are not white. And so you can't take out the white supremacy and colonization just because you have a diverse cast. And so whenever we are then thinking about how do we engage with the audience is still getting that message because of the script that we're doing. And so those type of plays, again, not to shit on them, they exist for a reason. And I do enjoy Tennessee Williams for the most part. Anyway, is not let's throw it all in the trash, but let's be real about it, y'all. Like these types of stories, those classic American theater stories that are in the canon we are all taught, they do not transcend racial and cultural lines like we all want to pretend that they do. And so if we're very honest with ourselves from the get-go, we're going to have a better relationship with our audience as relations versus they're going to come in here and then be told what's up. All right, that's the end of my polarizing hot take.
Claudia, can you talk a little bit about, I noticed you mentioned something in the chat box about how there is also sort of a kind of indoctrination to the relationship with the audience.
Yes. Well, you know, I can talk all day long, so I want to make sure I'm not sucking up all the oxygen, but if you invite me, let me go. So yeah, I believe that there's a grooming that takes place. As a person who lives in this country, you are groomed into particular behaviors. And that grooming takes place where you're either rewarded for certain types of behaviors or you're punished. We're often groomed into always, you enter the space quietly. You allow what's taking place to be the dominant thing, and you only support the thing that's taking place. You do not interrupt the thing that's taking place. You support the thing that's taking place. That type of audiencing is aggressively about making sure you're a participatory, you're someone who is not actually participating. You're just receiving a message and then leaving with that message. You're not helping to make the message. You're not co-creating the message. You're receiving the message and walking away with it. I find it fascinating when other audience members will police my behavior and will say, oh, you are audiencing incorrectly because you're adding to the meaning making happening here. And I'm only supposed to be receiving the meaning making happening here. You're not even supposed to be here. Isn't that a wonderful way to train people into living in the country we live in today? Isn't that a wonderful way to do that? So I feel like, and again, this isn't like, it's not like you've got a bunch of people who have mustaches that they're twirling and they're like, oh, I'm going to do this. The horrible sickness of white supremacy culture and colonization is that the mustache twirlers, they did their design work generations ago. And now we're just living in these weird normalized soups of really toxic, weird ways of being and doing. So the act of having participatory theater is an act of decolonization, in my Claudia Alec personal opinion.
I also think it's interesting because what you just said was really interesting because it's also part of how, like, not all European theater was not participatory, but when it came into this context, it ceased to be participatory, which is very interesting in terms of the way that those plays are used in this country.
And also the work that is participatory is not deemed to be at a high price point. So if it's participatory or community-based, it's actually devalued monetarily in a capitalist frame, which means it doesn't get resourced. So the work that gets resourced is the work that helps to maintain white supremacy culture.
Hey, Lisa, you got some thoughts swirling over there?
I'm just thinking about this is a little bit going down a different pathway from this question of audience relationships, but I was thinking about my own sort of position within a large institutional theater that is historically white, still predominantly white, and has sort of historically worked, and I'm speaking about Baltimore Center Stage right now, and it has historically sort of worked in a very traditional model where it was like, we're going to produce plays and the audience is going to come to us. And like we've sort of said, they'll receive the art that we make at them, and then they'll go away and they'll subscribe and we'll get all their money and, you know, this, that, and the other thing. And the role that I was sort of brought in to take on is called Artistic Partnerships and Innovation, which is an intentional shift away from institutional dramaturgy there was previously at Center Stage an actual institutional dramaturgy department. And there's a long legacy at Center Stage of like very traditional dramaturgy. And what I mean by that is like intellectual, research-based, sort of like heightening the discourse of what Center Stage was doing on stage, and helping the audience sort of heighten their own discourse. It was very like Western European style intellectualism. And some of the ways that I think that we're trying to break that down is actually like reframing what we think we're doing with dramaturgy across the institution. So it's no longer centralized in one individual who's like the public scholar and like therefore has more knowledge or more smarts or more whatever than everybody else. And therefore they should be listened to more than anyone else, which is like deeply problematic, right? If we're bringing in Indigenous artists, we're bringing in Black artists and people of color, and then we have a dramaturg, an institutional dramaturg who is like, let me research your community for you. Let me tell you how like your structure of your play isn't good, to go back to that discussion of like, what is a good dramaturgical structure? Maybe that's enough for now. I can talk more about it, but I offer that now.
Asa, Tara saw this quote, but Asa Benali, I was having this conversation with one of my favorite designers, Asa Benali, the other day, and we were having this deep conversation about like, how did I consistently justify like never hiring Native directors or Native designers for like Native plays? And he was like, he said this thing that just hit me so like hard in relationship to, he was like, oh, well, they're just like, well, let's just hire anyone because those people, they don't know how to be who they are. They don't know how to be who they are. And I was just like, yeah, that's literally, I think what they think. They're like, well, we can curate the Indigenous experience much more clearly than Native people could ever understand what it is. So I just wanted to add that framing to the beautiful words Annalisa was saying.
Mm.
Well, I'm deeply, I'm so curious about what is the dramaturgical act of helping to successfully tell the story and helping to successfully tell the story to a specific audience. I know that I was professionally trained in the, the 4-year college experience and the graduate school experience, and I was taught how to perform Blackness in a way that would be legible and palatable and attractive and enjoyed by white people. It wasn't how Black people actually behave in the world. It was a weird performance of a performative blackface that Black people are just expected to do in this country. And then it becomes a weird feedback loop of you watch the weird performative blackface done at you that was scripted by white people, that was directed by white people, that was paid for by white people, but it's a Black body that's giving it to you. And if you're a child absorbing that performance, you go, oh, well, is that how I'm supposed to behave? Should I have those inflections? Should I use those slang words? Is that what authentic performance is for me? And then later on as an adult being told by white people, could you make that a little Blacker? Just curious about how we decolonize that.
I think it comes down to, it's so funny, I was gonna say, it comes down to the power in the room. But when we're talking about like decolonization, it's we're removing that hierarchical power and spreading that power amongst the community who are there creating that story. But I think it comes down to that, because I can look back at, my entire life in the theater and just like how many times, I was told, oh, no, that's just like too Native, they're not going to get it. Or like being told that, oh no, I can't hire Native designers for this production about Native people written by a Native person, even after I handed them a spreadsheet with a list of designers broken up by their disciplines, their MFA programs, their lots of accolades, all the regional theaters, and still being told that they're not ready to work at another regional theater. Somebody said it in my face, and that theater no longer exists, so they get what they got. Anyway, but whenever we invest for the tea. I'm just here to do that anyway. So whenever we invest this quote unquote power into the community and allow those community folks to make the decisions, we eliminate all of that performative, I'm performing Blackness, I'm performing Nativeness, I'm performing Latino-ishness, whatever they want it to be. Because that power is within that community, and we're able to create authentically without those white structures in place, without the white gaze giving us the yes or no, without the white approval, without the white artistic director who's going to come in and give you notes during tech that you have to do if you want to work there again or work somewhere else where their best friend works, you know? And so I think it's reinvesting power, which power in this context is a colonial context, and putting it into the community power, which is inherently not colonized.
And also reinvesting accountability, like who you were accountable to, right? Like I think that I got in a lot of trouble early in my career because I didn't have any interest in being accountable to an artistic director if they were saying that I should do something that would harm my people. Because like, why would that make any logical sense? You know, like at the end of the day, like I have to go back to my people. I don't have to go back to this artistic director. But that a lot of people who really aren't necessarily, maybe aren't as tied to their community or really, really want the work and really want to press, you know, they feel like that power and that accountability, they have to do what that person says. But actually, like theater should never be. And I think that we're also very aware of this in this moment where all the theaters are closed. A lot of conversations have been coming up around the fact that like, you know, a lot of things can be said right now because not as much is actually being made about those people in power because the artists and them are actually separate while they're all still kind of, a lot of them still working and the rest of us are just sort of doing whatever we want. Our accountability to them is not the same as it once was when a job was constantly on the line. But it's just very interesting, this relationship of like artists versus what has become a very hierarchical theater industry, in that the people who, a lot of them were once artists, have become more and more and more office oriented in their thinking and kind of like forgotten what it was to be part of a community. And a lot of that, I'm not saying doesn't come to pressure and fundraising and actually probably interchanging with a lot of board members who are like in the business sector, you know, but things like that, it's like, who are we accountable to? We're not really, like, they should be thinking about how they're accountable to their audiences, how they're accountable to their artists. We shouldn't all be thinking about how we're accountable to them.
So how do we, with this shift that we're starting to see and this lifting up of leaders of color, how do we provide the support systems for them so that they can come into this extremely established European system and have the power to disrupt that? How do we, as board members, as leaders of organizations that are primarily white, that have been functioning in this system, what's the, and I know I'm asking for tell me what to do, which is problematic, but I want to know how can I serve this movement and make sure that people have the opportunities to make those changes.
I can take a try at answering somehow. One of the things that I sort of go back to frequently is that leaders of color like know how to do what needs to be done and have for decades sort of been already doing it. And when leaders of color, Black leaders, Indigenous leaders are invited into sort of like these well-established, historically white institutions, they're often not listened to. So it's like an optical choice to bring a Black leader to take over a historically white theater. And then they're in that power, but then the board won't listen to them. And they'll say, do you really want to make that choice? Do you really, like, oh, that's your first season that you want to program? And it's all problematized from the back, like right off from jump. And so I guess like what I would ask for on behalf of like all of the, I mean, I can't really speak on behalf of all of the leaders, but like thinking of my own little self, like if I were in a position like newly leading one of these theaters, what I would really want is a board who trusted me enough to like name what changes I wanted to make, and a board who if they encountered their own sort of fragility around like, oh, why does Annalisa want to do that thing? That's not how we've done it ever before. And I'm afraid the money will go away if we do this, if this thing that Annalisa wants to do. If they instead of problematizing that to my face, if they were like resourced enough within their own communities to be like, I need to understand why I'm having this reaction of fragility, and did that work on their own.
I also just want to say that the board technically is a collective of people that is supposed to ensure that the theater is doing what it's supposed to be doing to serve the public good. And I feel like that is very rarely the function
That's
the
real.
board serves.
That's real.
Yes, I wanted to share a small story. It's a story of a person of color who was on a board, a theater board. This theater decided to do Yellowface. This board president helped them to do this. Why? Because the board president, I think, this is Claudia looking at this story from a very far distance, trying to figure out, how does this happen? How do you get a person of color, an Asian person, supporting the producing of Yellowface? And I recognized it was because that board leader was serving the survival needs of the institution, as if the institution lived in a siloed place that wasn't in conversation with any other things, and also was saying yes to all of the design logics of that institution. So the institution was like, well, we have to do this racist play or we can't exist. And so then the board president's like, well, I have to somehow find a way to help you do this racist play without it being racist. I feel like that's one of the problems of our institutions right now. If the main performative score of the institution is to replicate white supremacy culture, then I'm not sure how to help them to not do that. I'm not sure what gigantic interventions I can do to help them to not do that. So I'm just going to take out my microphone and say, the way you can help all of us is to give us your money and let us start our own organizations from scratch. So we're not doing all this extra labor to unpack, fix, shore up these things that are, we already know they're toxic and broken. And I feel frustrated. We're wasting a lot of amazing, talented BIPOC producers' time right now, because instead of them being allowed to just succeed and do something good, they have to convince a bunch of people that their ideas actually do have worth. And then they have to like only half succeed because the institution will have undermined the thing that they were trying to do. And then they have to come up with a narrative about that. I say support artists of color directly and allow us to begin building our own institutions.
Yes. Number one, open your purse. Number two, think, yes, something that came up for me like through this conversation is also about performance reviews. And because performance reviews and evaluating someone's quality and worth and artistic value to an institution is inherently colonized. You know, I mean, I say all the time, this is colonized, because it is. But because you have to think about who's reviewing whom and from what lens are they using to review if they are good and worthy of the dollars of the position. And more often than not, it's that framework that's inherently colonized coming from a Western European thought. And so for me, now as a native director, I've had multiple experiences where I've been in meetings with artistic directors who were white. Yeah, they were all white. And they were white. And the feedback they were giving to me about how what I was doing wasn't good. The actors were, quote, not good. The story was, quote, not good. And I needed to change things to make it good. And they told me what that was. What they were telling me to do was Disneyfy the native stories I was trying to tell, which that's another can of worms for another time of day. They didn't want authenticity. They did not want community. They did not want relational building, which is what we were doing in that space and was, in my humble opinion, very good. No, instead, they were giving me these evaluations and telling me that I'm not going to be worthy of this money and all of these things if it is not fitting within their little Zoom box I'm in right now that they want me to stay in. And so how can we support people like within our institutions? Like, number one, I mean, yeah, open up your money, open up your purses, give it checks. Anybody got a check? Write me a check, write them all checks. Yes, let's empower BIPOC producers, create your own organization, because if your foundation is rotten of your organization, you can't build on top of that. You know, I've never built a house. I've been around houses that got built, but the foundation is rotten from what I understand. That house is not going to stand up. So why are we going to pretend if we replace a few beams of the drywall, it's going to stand up when it's not? But then also, if you have BIPOC folks in your institution, what are you doing to disempower them? And I can guarantee these types of performance reviews are one of those things that are disempowering folks from speaking up, from asking for change, for asking for justice, for wanting to make the entire organization better, because they know they're going to be critiqued along the way, and be critiqued by people and folks who not only got us in the situation that we are in now, which is unjust and harmful, but also by folks who had to drink that Kool-Aid. You know, I mean, it's not just white folks who uphold white supremacy. BIPOC folks do it too. And I tend, Tara, to be very gentle with that, because whenever we're trying to survive, BIPOC people are trying to survive, one of the tools that you can use is assimilation. And it's also be very, very cognizant. And then also being very cognizant, looping back to what Annalise said about intergenerational trauma, that BIPOC people carry intergenerational trauma. And I mean, literally carry it. And so last year there was a scientific study, TLDR, we knew this. However, whenever an individual is exposed to prolonged trauma, and I'm talking like slavery, genocide, boarding schools, concentration camps, like that level of trauma is, you have too much of that stress hormone in your body, it alters gene expression. So you can see that altered gene, and then that altered gene then is hereditary from birth giver to child, and it continues on. Now, typically, how do we fix that, right? It's through intergenerational healing. And also if that ongoing trauma has stopped. And so what I think is wild is that they've noticed this in Holocaust survivors and their descendants here in the United States, where after that event, that level of trauma stopped. And so as we are now, I forget how many generations removed, they are not seeing that altered gene expression in their descendants anymore, because they had that opportunity to heal. But whenever they've looked at Black folks and at Indigenous folks and other people of color, it's still there because it's still ongoing. So like I think about boarding schools where they would literally steal Native children and Black children, probably other children, but I know specifically for those, and then put them in a school where they were beaten, murdered, if they did not convert and assimilate. And then that ended, I say, in 1975. So I don't know about y'all, but my parents were alive during that. And I say, quote, ended, because it's still happening. And we see that happening through the foster care system, because that's how that was created, was to continue that work. And I also look to my relations in Canada and even here in the United States, where like Black and brown children, especially Black and Native children, are still being taken from their homes and then beaten and abused if they don't convert. So see, that level of trauma hasn't ended. It's still happening. So how can we expect to not continue to carry that? Yes, thank you, Annalisa, in our personal chat here, talking about family separation at the border, another very real example of how it's happening today, July 25th, 2020. So then we keep all of that in mind. So that's why I'm also very gentle about how BIPOC people also uphold white supremacy, because we're just trying to survive. Yes, Claudia, yes. Oh my God, recently a Black child literally in jail because she didn't do her homework. Like, again, continuing that ongoing trauma. Okay, yes.
I just want to add, just in terms of Tara, yes, all that, yes, Claudia, yes, all that, yes. I just want to add in terms of thinking about how that also directly relates to our institutions, right? So very often what happens is that you do not bring a group of BIPOC people, or you bring like one Native person, you bring like one Black person, and you bring them into your predominantly white institution. And then all of the things that they're trying to do at the beginning, you like sort of bop them on a head enough times and say no, or maybe later. And then eventually what you're essentially doing is you're siloing them from their culture, and then you're forcing them into assimilation. that's what that is. It's not actually a situation in which they're able to do the work. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because like I was so grateful today when Annalisa asked, you know, was like, oh, Maddie and Tara, because like I made a rule recently where I was like, I don't want to be in any more conversations where I'm the only Native person, because it's making me unable to do the work. Like the longer I end up in these environments, like the more I am unable to do the work, because after a certain period of time, you just get so tired of saying the same thing, and you're constantly in a position of trying to undo versus actually doing, right? It's the same thing as that, like decolonize. Why are we still why aren't we just like able to be liberated at this point? Like, no, we're still in this like constant, perpetual, slow snail crawl against the ongoing trauma that is still happening. But I just wanted to say in relation to that also, like that's also sort of something that I've been thinking a lot about recently, how even in my own work, like as a Native person who predominantly works with their Native folks, there's also this issue of, in relationship thinking about the word decolonization, right? That like pretty much most of our plays still that are written in the Western structure are written between Native people and colonization in some thing, because we haven't gotten past that relationship. And I've suddenly like, you know, become really frustrated. Like, how come there's not like, how come we're not intersecting with Black liberation? How come we're not intersecting with all of these other things that are going on? Because we're still trapped in that positionality between us and colonialism. Like we haven't gotten out of that. And so right now I'm really interested in how like we get to the next step, even in Native theater, so that we're not trapped even in our own imaginations in this cycle of having to explain what our relationship is to colonization. Because yeah, it's like if you bring a bunch of BIPOC folks alone, isolated, into a predominantly white organization, like there are so many things you're going to be doing to traumatize them that I have nothing else to really say on that. That's it. That's where I end.
Yes, I am so agreeing with you on everything you are saying. I'm kind of agreeing with everything everybody is saying, and I look forward to rewatching this video. I'm going to enjoy it. I think that one of the things that most institutions need to get real clear on is that white dominant systems result in negative outcomes. Just get real true with that. Get real with that. Our experience, my entire lifetime of experience in studying all the other previous generations of, we've tested this theory, we know it's true. So that means if you want to do a systems design that actually results in positive outcomes for most of the people inside that systems, you can't have a white dominant system. You actually have to stop that. And to a certain extent, that does mean that we have to start demanding the frameworks that we are willing to do the labor within. So I'm doing the very hard work of saying no to money. When somebody invites me into a space where I'm like, oh, I could definitely use those resources to keep surviving on this planet, but you know what? I don't want to do that. I'm not going to put myself into a situation where I am by myself alone being asked to do some gigantic piece of labor to save a predominantly white institution. That doesn't make any sense for me and my health and my heart. I'd also argue that this white dominant imagination, it pins a lot of us in as writers and creators. So this is a shout out to the new play development world, where it's really nice to be able to write a story that doesn't have whiteness centered in it. Unfortunately, most of our regional theaters demand that whiteness is centered in the story about the people of color. And the way you do that is you make it a story about the people of color's pain at white supremacy culture. So then the white people can watch the show and go, you know what? I'm not a bad person. I didn't do that to those people. Man, they're suffering. I'm a good person. They can leave. All the brown people in the audience are completely traumatized. So are the actors on stage. And that's a performance, I think, that's about recuperating the feelings of a particular population in the audience. It's not actually about telling good stories. I also want to do a shout out for my project, We Charge Genocide TV, not only because I'm self-serving and shouting out my own project, but because it's specifically a collaboration between Black and Indigenous people. I think white supremacy culture wants to keep Black and Indigenous people fighting each other. And I'm real suspect at that. So if I can find spaces where I can go, yes, this country is killing us. Let's make some art about that and collaborate. I'm all for it. Check.
Well, you know, Claudia, I have a little sneaky play development idea in my brain that I'm going to talk to you about. But fun fact, in addition to just straight up interracial marriage laws, like prohibiting them, there were additional laws that were specifically like making any sort of marriages between Native and, quote, anyone of African descent, law, like marriages outright illegal. So interracial marriage laws weren't enough. They had to then be even more specific. Yeah, so I found that out and I was like, I'm put that back in my little noggin and we're gonna do something with that because
I want to say, like, all of this in terms of within a PWI or primarily white institution within this overall structure, and then new plays and trying to bring stories to our communities within all of this construct. So now we're at this moment where we're in the middle of a break that in some ways Mother Earth has like provided to us to stop and think about what we've been doing. So in this moment, what are you each thinking about and how you want to return, or you're already in process of whatever generation is happening? So like, what do you want to do when you return, especially related to this question of decolonization? You've probably been doing what you do amazingly all of this time, but can you share that with us, and like what you do see as the friction points too within that? Like, is it a project? Is it in an institution, changing an institution, anything? Yeah.
This isn't like concrete thing, but I've actually noticed that I think Native theater is more active right now than it ever was before, because what has happened previously is that Native theater has been in PWIs predominantly for white audiences. What is happening in this moment is that thousands of people at their nations, wherever they are, at their tribal nations, can click on the Zoom box and watch Native plays. And that to me is really interesting because like I used to hypothetically, we always hypothetically talk like, oh, like how are we gonna like make, Native theater more accessible to like Native people no matter where they are. And I just wanted to acknowledge that because it actually feels like kind of special that we're actually able to in many ways connect Native theater with more Native audiences in this moment. Like similarly, at the Yale Indigenous Performing Arts program this summer, I was like, you know what, like let's have a couple free online like playwriting workshops, because we have these different programs throughout the year set up where especially Native youth can write. We have an annual Native playwriting competition that results in development opportunity. But then I was thinking like, okay, like let's do something small, like let's do a monologue competition so that they have a way to try their hand, but let's give them a fiscal reward. Like, let's give them $100 if they win, let's not have it just be all ethereal. But in the case of the playwriting workshops, what I think is really interesting is the ability to have Tara Moses and then also Vera Starbar just did one, teach these workshops where I just like put on the internet, any Native writers of any experience level, just come, it's free. And they all show up from all over the place, right? You're not getting like people from like one area, you're getting people showing up from all over the place with all of their like multiplicity of stories. I mean, when you have over 570 federally recognized tribal nations, like that means that every single one of them has very different stories and very different place to be sharing. And the importance of empowering every single one of them to tell their stories is profound. But then, because of the powers of the internet, right, I can connect them to professional Native playwrights who are making a living doing that work. I can connect them to Vera saying, that like maybe on the first season of Molly of Denali, they didn't trust hiring Native writers, but on the second season, you better bet the predominant, like most of the writing team is Native, because they learned that our stories are powerful and have been powerful since the beginning of time. So just the ability to connect that is happening right now doesn't give me any sort of like answers to the future. But what it is telling me is it's telling me that like, there will always be ways we can tell these stories, and that's not something I have to worry about.
This is Claudia speaking. I can answer that question by saying there is no returning. Returning suggests that there's a thing that was that we get to go back to. There is no returning. I know that personally, I'm trapped in my home studio until there's a vaccine. But even what does it look like afterwards? I think about the impacts of the climate crisis and the necessities of just transition. I think about all of the coalitions of folks who are currently involved in this national racial uprising for justice. I'm hoping that in the future, I will be able to maintain the places where this increasing digital connectivity has made more access for me and my body and my ways of creating work. I'm hoping I will get to maintain my predominantly BIPOC female-led teams, and actually they're going to be the ones who are leading later. My only hope is that we don't have a return. I don't want a return. I've been fighting that my entire career. Let's not go backwards.
Thank you. Terrible choice of words. Thank you. Look, I'm programmed. I'm like trying to re-educate transformation. Tara and Elisa?
Yeah, I mean, same. I don't want to go back. Like, we're done. But yeah, no, I mean, I've been like marinating on the question since it was asked, and like listening to Maddie and Claudia, because next fall I'm going to grad school, and it's like, well, that's going to be interesting. As it's an Ivy League institution, it is predominantly white, and I will be their first ever Native student. And so, yeah, that's a time anyway. And so I'm thinking, like, what do I want that to be? I mean, I want that to not be violent. I want to be able to create in the ways that I want to create. I want to be able to actually center community. I want to be able to safely and confidently invite other Native artists to apply and advocate for them. Because as it stands, as we're in this little limbo, as of July 25th, 2020, I am confident that if I were to really recruit other Native artists to come through this program, that it would be a safe place for them. And once upon a time, last year, I made a rule for myself, kind of like Maddie made her rule very recently, where I'm not going to pass on an opportunity. I'm not going to invite people in if I do not know for a fact, or like as much for a fact as I can, that they won't be traumatized in the process. And that's drastically changed like how, you know, I work in relationship to institutions and other artists. And so looking forward, what I hope is to have that opportunity where I no longer need to have that first step stop of, let's seriously evaluate this and see if I'm going to put a peer in a violent situation. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I mean, and that comes from rapid healing. That comes from dismantling this white supremacy box that we have to create in. It comes from taking away this evaluation through a Eurocentric way, like lens. It comes from throwing out colonized theater as we know it and being opening for storytelling that has been going on since ever, across the world. Yeah, so I mean, that's what I'm currently sitting with. Annalisa?
I'll just share two quick things. One is to sort of underscore a little bit of what Claudia was referencing about the necessity of a just transition, and some of the movement building that's happening around a Green New Theater. I just want to invite people to like join the organizing that's happening, and it's not limited to theater. So the second thing I wanted to sort of amplify right now that's going on this weekend is the Allied Media Conference. And I think my experience inside of professional theater circles has been that we are pretty insular in theater. We sort of like are running in the hamster wheel of like, I have to work in the regional theater, I have to work in New York, I have to do theater all the time. And I'm just curious about like how to break that open. And there's so many different kinds of media for storytelling that are not, I don't want to say they're not colonized, but like, what happens when we release ourselves from the need to just be successful in theater and to specialize in one thing in theater and have that be your definition of like what success looks like. So just to underscore the Allied Media Conference, which is happening this weekend, please go Google it. And then there's great resources on just transition frameworks from Movement Generation that are pretty easily Googleable. Yeah, Claudia, I was just underscoring what you sort of mentioned really briefly. Movement building for a just transition is specifically, in a nutshell, it's about moving from extractive economies toward regenerative economies. And in many ways, like that in itself is a way to describe what decolonization is. So please, I just invite everybody to sort of look for Movement Generations resources on just transition frameworks.
Thank you for that. And Nan, if you would also share with us your thoughts.
My thoughts are spinning. So much that Claudia was speaking earlier about how she needs to move and be active in these situations. And I'm finding myself needing to do that too, because I'm so amped up about all the knowledge that's coming to me and all of those little tiny things that we take for granted. I take for granted every day that I'm doing, that I feel are making a change, but maybe all they're doing is inspiring another thought, that other thought and the other thought and the next thought will get us to change. NNPN had begun doing some anti-racist work a couple of years ago, and as I think you probably all know, it led us to totally dismantling our board and seating an entirely new board, looking at our governance structure. We're right now leading our organizations as they try to help think about when we come, not back, but in the new forward, how they can begin to shed some of these lifelong generational practices. So I'm mostly just thankful for this time and the energy that's going into all of this, and trying to learn better to how to be proactive, but with input, and not just think, oh, this is the way to do it, that we're going to just do it this way without hearing from everyone, without taking that information in. And then how do we best support the continuation of the work? Because I'm like you, Claudia, I'm not going back. I have zero desire to go back to the way we were doing this. I personally think a lot of it does live with boards, and that was a conversation that happened earlier, that those boards have to be reflective of the artists that we are working with. And NPN theaters have been producing BIPOC work for a lot of years, but in a way that was through this systemic lens. And how do we make sure that we stop that we do healing about that we make apologies about that we acknowledge what has been done incorrectly, and really think deeply about, I'm at least I'm that idea of, Maddie talking about being the one person in the room and having one person of this and one person of that without the support of each other and the entire group, it's not going to happen. So back, like when we talk about individuals, that individual learning has to open you up to a larger learning that then can be shared and taken forward. And that is what I am interested in doing. Thank you so much for this time and the beginning of many conversations, not just with us, but I believe and hope that we're also inspiring those conversations from everybody that's watching right now. And how do we take that work forward?
Speaking of which, thank you, Nan, for that. Just lifting up We See You. Is it WeSeeYou.org, WeSeeYou.com? But there's a 33-page list of a blueprint, a map really for all of us to look at our institutions, also looking outside of our institutions. How do we create work in community and independent of institutions, as Claudia has lifted up for us as well? I hope that everybody is going to check out, it's WeSeeYouWatt.com. Thank you, Annalisa. And I just want to invite each of our panelists, we have about 7 minutes left. If you could shout out a call to action that we invite our audiences to consider and to act on.
Ooh, I thought of one. So a call to action for specifically settler audiences is to sit with your discomfort, sit with your fragility, and don't weaponize your discomfort or fragility.
Deeply inspired by the trainings that are going on that I feel like are this is me referencing Madeline Sayet's program where Native playwrights are getting professional training from other Native playwrights. That's amazing, and that is creating the next generation of plays that I'm going to get to produce and engage with. That is a powerful act of decolonization. So my call to action is this: we are entering into a new frontier of digital producing, and I would like to invite all of the institutions. Don't hire a white digital producer. Develop a team of BIPOC digital producers. You can join me at producinginpandemic.com. I do weekly free training sessions. So send me some folks. If they aren't already trained, send them to me. I will train them. Call to action: hire Black people.
Okay, so yeah, thank you. That's great, Claudia. I like all these things so far. Something I'm thinking about, especially as we're all sort of like localized in a way that we haven't been always. We're all sort of in a place right now. For the most part, very few of us are traveling compared to usual. I've been thinking a lot about this sort of like the way land acknowledgement has turned into thinking about who's not here instead of who is, and how problematic that is. And so I really invite you all in this moment to do two things. One, to find out who is not was unceded land, blah, 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 like not just whose land you're on, but like who is alive and talking and speaking and engaging that you can, we're in Zoom world right now. There's like a million lectures you can go to, right? Where you're actually engaging with people. I'm not telling you have to go walk down the street and make friends with someone. I'm just telling you to go and actually engage in whatever online events are happening from Native people in your community. Like there are going to be millions, no matter where you are. So just try and seek that out. And then also to consider the place names around you and finding out what one of those words means in an Indigenous language. I don't really care if it's like Smith Street. Sorry, continue.
Oh, that's amazing. I suppose a call to do something. I'm like sitting with call to action and like, is that a phrase that comes to us from warfare? I don't know. And just wondering about, again, sort of amplifying the Allied Media Conference and the immense wisdom of people who are like those plenaries right now this weekend are freely available because of the digital COVID of it all. And I really encourage you to go back. There's a couple of plenaries that happened yesterday and the day before. One of which was with Adrienne Marie Brown and her sister Autumn. And just like, please go watch that. And then the other one yesterday was with a bunch of really amazing Black writers talking about writing new worlds and sort of speculative fiction and sci-fi Afrofuturism and the technologies of narrative that will bring us new worlds. So I just invite you to learn more and continue to be in relationship. This is similar along the lines of what Maddie just said, but like there's so much available right now, and learning from the wisdom of Black and Indigenous folks that are offering right now freely available. Please avail yourself of that.
I just want to encourage people to face their fear and their lack of knowledge and be really proactive about seeking out. There's this amazing list of resources. Talk to people, do the change. I talk about the work that NNPN has done, you know, it just had to be done. And the only way to do it was to start. It might not always be perfect. It's not going to be right. We're going to make mistakes. But if you don't try, nothing's going to change. So do it. Just do it. Learn, share. Go.
Annalisa, do you want to share your last thought there?
It's not my last thought. It's Maddie's last thought.
Oh,
She just
Maddie's
wrote-
last thought.
No,
Oh,
no, no. I already had a turn though, so I can't say it. I just wrote
We all-
also not
Hey,
being
no.
colonized is more fun.
It is.
More fun.
It's very joyful. I mean, that's why we love making things with other people. Well, I just want to say thank you all so much for an incredible conversation. And I hope that everyone takes this all in. And as a last moment, I'm going to ask everyone to plant your feet on the earth again, on the ground underneath where you're sitting or standing or reclining. And take a deep breath in of all of the wisdom and the actions. And then breathe it out when you're ready. And step into transformation. So thank you all so much for being here. It was so wonderful to learn from all of you. And I can't wait to see what comes next. I'm going to hand it back to Jessica.
There's nothing I need to say. We can just end it at that. But thank you so much for everyone and this conversation and for those that showed up. Thank you.